everyone, welcome back to the channel. We're Performance Agile. I'm Eric.
And I'm Vince.
And today we're talking DevOps. And for the quote of the day, I'm going to be handling the quote. We have Charles Darwin, and he is quoted as saying, "It is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change."
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty relevant to the DevOps conversation.
It's relevant to every conversation.
If you've been following the channel, you know so far up until this point, a lot of the conversations that we've covered are frameworks or methodologies or philosophies, the mindset, and we've talked about delivering value, but we really haven't covered a topic yet that tells us how to actually do the deliverance of the value. Have we? We really haven't talked about delivery.
Well, there's probably a good reason for that.
And why is that?
Well, when you consider, yes, everything that we've talked about so far, in the Agile movement, it's all been centered on the team, developing whatever the product is, right? And so, yes, there's a lot of focus right now on finally bridging that gap and making that seamless connection between business and said teams developing these products. But yes, none of those frameworks actually address pushing into production, right? So yeah. I think we're going to do that today.
So we've started all the way on the left from the capability being defined, the requirements have been written, they've been sized, they've been estimated, they've been discussed and negotiated, they've been time boxed, they've been allocated to a sprint if you're doing Scrum, or they're in a Kanban flow if you're doing Kanban, and now the code is written and you throw it over the wall. You say, "Here, ops, fetch."
Yeah, so traditionally, yes, as things are developed in phases, right? So the developers will produce whatever it is that they're making, and then they'll hand it off to testing, and then let's just say hypothetically that it makes it through testing on the first pass, and then it's the release or deploy aspect into production. So there are people who are involved in the acceptance of that code, if it's software, for that push into production. That takes a long time. In that, I don't want to call it the current process, but I regret that there are still some organizations out there that are deploying their value that way. Hence, DevOps. What would you like to point out first about the difference in the DevOps approach versus the approach that I just described?
So, one of the myths of DevOps that I'd like to address up front is that it becomes the concept of no ops. That's not the case either. You don't get rid of your operations team. But what we start seeing is now everything starts shifting to the left. Rather than saying ops is the last thing we worry about, now ops is being brought into the conversation earlier and earlier, because what you see a lot of is development gets to do things on their local machine and their test environment, but there's not very many times your test, your staging, or even your pre-prod actually looks like prod. There's always like a different config file in place. There's like a different networking structure that exists. So yeah, dev is like, "Hey, I got it all to work." And ops is like, "Okay, well, we'll roll it out." And it turns into a massive dumpster fire. And it's an all hands meeting at 1:00 in the morning because everything's broken.
Yeah. So
you bring them to the left.
So you bring them into the left. So where Agile has done a good job, or is doing a better job at identifying the requirements and including business and getting that work down to the technology teams or manufacturing or whatever it is, right? And now what we're saying is that the production side is now being included in the deployment of said value, whatever it is that we're building. So we truly do have now an end-to-end flow seamlessly from the inception of a need into the hands of a user. So we finally bridged the gap between where it all started in the middle with the developers in Agile. Now we're bridging the gap with business, and now we're including and making this release into production a lot more efficient and seamless with DevOps.
So DevOps is culture, philosophy, engineering practices, and it is so much more than just a pipeline. People seem to tend to read these articles and they're like, oh man, we're only DevOps if we have a Jenkins or a GitLab pipeline. And it's like, it's not really the case.
Yeah.
It's really not the case.
Right.
So you can do DevOps if there is no automated pipeline in place. And don't get me wrong, the automated pipeline surely helps in CI/CD.
Well, it is very underlying aspect of the whole DevOps philosophy, right?
You can still have that mentality though, and involve ops without a pipeline, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you're looking to do, good. We talked in XP in our last video about the 10-minute build, pair programming, continuous integration, and then you're now enabling continuous deployment. That is where that pipeline comes in, and that starts building out those underlying engineering practices. But that mentality, that overarching philosophy of bringing in operations does not require the use of a pipeline.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I'm going to make a comment that people may disagree with. And for the life of me, I can't understand why they would. But if you really haven't taken the time to either watch our XP video or just to research XP on your own, fundamentally, the engineering practices that they identified that are necessary or inherent to that particular approach, again, it just baffles me that if you're not implementing and including some of those things, I mean, I think that's where a lot of our engineering best practices came from, to include the bridging of the gap or the creation of DevOps, right? So I think there's a lot of the roots and the origins of that in this. So yeah.
So one of the other things now that has come, DevOps was here, and now it has gone even further. So it is now referred to largely as DevSecOps.
Correct.
And again, in the traditional way of doing things, it would be your requirements kicked over to, your dev team, which would be kicked to testing, and testing would be this broad scope of user acceptance testing, pre-prod, stage, and security scans. They might even be a separate organization at this point that happens after prod. They might even get stood up in a production environment, and then security comes in and goes, oh, you have something in production. Now let's go scan it and see how vulnerable it is.
Yeah. So let me clarify a little bit of that. So in quality assurance is before pre-prod, and quality assurance is essentially not checking for security. It's not even a system integration environment per se. Your first round of quality assurance is basically just, kicking the tires, on what was developed, specifically what was developed, and not necessarily is that breaking anything in terms of system integration. There should be likely a phase of system integration somewhere after that first round of quality assurance and pre-prod, right? So let's talk about pre-prod. Pre-prod is where your system administrators, your security people will do their first touch of, like security scanning, things like that. Then, once those are addressed, then you get the green light. You go through your change control boards, your CCBs or whatever, depending on where it is, how you define that in your organizations, for the thumbs up to go, right? To push that into production. Then likely another scan will be done again by the security people to ensure that There are no open risks in terms of whether it's patches or ports that are open or whatever it is that they identify and whatever programs that they're using to do that. So yeah, it's usually staged, but now with DevSecOps, again, security is included up front, right at the very beginning, and included in the process rather than at the end of it.
Right.
So yeah.
So every time you do your push, your commit to your code repository, you're continuing to do that CI where you're pushing every couple of hours, at least once a day at a minimum. You're getting a code scan back at the point of commit that says, here's all your open vulnerabilities that, the code, most popular are like the OWASP tools, which is an open source database that pulls from the NIST. There's also SonarQube and Fortify, Black Duck, and there's so many tools that exist now that tie into Jenkins and GitLab and GitHub that will do all those scans for you. And really, they're just trying to emphasize on the shift everything to the left mentality.
Yeah. So if you're out there and you're thinking, well, security is not part of Agile, wow, are you wrong? Let's face it. I mean, on the left side in business, finance is now being included in Agile. Human resources is now being included in Agile. Why in the world would we exclude security from any of what it is that we're trying to improve upon here? So yeah, security is absolutely essential in this conversation.
Yeah, and that was largely driven out of all of the data breaches that we've seen over the last couple of years. So it's September 2020 right now. And in the last few years offhand, we had the Target breach, the Sony breach, the Equifax breach, the OPM, the Office of Personnel Management breach. Millions, if not billions of dollars in raw data stolen.
Yep.
Credit cards.
Let's face it, if your business is finance, if it's healthcare, if it's government, military,
or if it even touches finance,
any of those things, and you go through a significant data breach, somebody's going to be answering to the likes of some congressional inquiry. So it's a significant event, and it hasn't been taken seriously in the past. But I believe because of all of those incidents that it is more taken seriously. But still, I think that there's a lot of improvements to be made there. All right, so let's get back to this concept of moving things through from development into production a little bit more before we get too far off the topic.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
So one of the big things that you need whenever you're doing a DevOps from a team's perspective is monitoring. You need to be able to monitor the environments in which your code is deployed, because again, it's not no ops, but the burden of responsibility is now shared because ops being a part of the team. It is also now on the developers to realize whenever the operational environment is not healthy and needs to be fixed. But you can't do that if there's no what they call LMA, which is logging, monitoring, alerting. You need a good health stack, and that generally comes in the form of Elastic, Grafana, Kibana, like a dashboard that has a heartbeat that's monitoring all of the open services. It's taking a look at all the APIs and making sure those calls are coming in and coming out with the performance that the SLA describes. And if anything goes down, if you're doing pet instances in your database, like everybody knows that email server goes out, CEO can't get their email. It's like, all hands on deck. Or depending on how you've built your architecture, if you're doing something that's like a Kubernetes container setup where one cluster of containers goes down, but your dev and your ops have come together to say, hey, if we want a really scalable architecture that can heal itself, if one cluster goes down, the container controller is like, oh, I need to spin up a couple of more, and everything's hunky-dory. But it's dev and ops working together that are going to be able to monitor those environments and realize where they need to jump in and help out and fix things. But if you don't have monitoring, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what else? What else do you have?
Well, I would say that whenever you're involving ops now and you're involving security now,
Mm-hmm.
the mindset is still one team, one fight. So don't get into the mindset of, well, this is security's problem or this is an operational problem. This is your value streams item. It's your line of efforts problem. So you're still working together collaboratively. You're still working incrementally, iteratively over time, because one of the things that you'll see a lot of in DevOps pictures is the Mobius strip, the infinity symbol, to say that this is an infinite process of develop, push to ops, maintain, monitor.
Mm-hmm.
It never ends. It never stops.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone's constantly working together to maintain the requirements, the code, the health of the systems, and
it's part of the value stream. And so when we say value stream, a value stream is nothing but a collection of activities, right? So it's literally, we want that end-to-end process to be truly connected and efficient, and seamless all the way through. So this is just another aspect of piecing that together. So everyone's got their piece of this puzzle. The days of silos and segmented, these linear handoffs, they're a thing of the past, and everybody is trying to find their way to get away from that, and to be more efficient. So these are good practices. It's a great thing. If you haven't already implemented it on your development and production side, you should seriously consider it. I mean, it's going to pay off huge dividends. Granted, there's a big investment to make the transition over, just like any change in behavior, change of tools, your architecture, just all of that. It's not trivial, but the payoff will be big in the end. And I think that's it for today, folks. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and give us a like. Please leave your comments below, and we'll see you on the next video.